Dr. Sandoval is a professor here at St. Louis University in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. He is a demographer. He is involved in all sorts of work in the community, including some projects around empowering community members, the Demography for Democracy, D4D, and Coding for Spatial Justice. I don't know what that is, but the initials are CSJ, which are the initials of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. I think I can safely say this doesn't have to do with the sisters. Would you say that's correct? So without further ado, I present Dr. Ness Sándoval.
Thank you for the invitation to share some research on the St. Louis metropolitan region. I'm a demographer, and so as a demographer, we count. We count different demographic actions that are out in the United States. And so what I count are the number of people that are dying, the number of people that are born, and the number of people who are moving. Those are the three core demographic transitions. From those transitions, we see other types of demographic transitions that impact quality of life, that impact schools, that impact businesses. My presentation today is available to the public, and the data that's in these slides are also available to the public as part of our project of Demography for Democracy. The data does no good if it sits on my computer. So my goal as a professor is to get the data out to the public so they can start using it and talking with their community about what this data means for them and what the possible future can look like and what policy options are available to change those types of futures. Second, I have a research lab, and so I have lots of students who are interested in working on these topics, and so I want to thank them for their work on some of the charts that are available. And last, I just want to thank community members. Many of the charts that you're going to see in this presentation today are actually from community members who are asking me questions about the city, about the region. And so part of the inspiration is from community members who are trying to make the St. Louis metropolitan region a better place to work, live, and relax. In my presentation, there's going to be 4 demographic hurdles that we have to confront as a region. The first hurdle, if we're thinking about population growth, we have to understand that the St. Louis metropolitan region is being challenged today. The St. Louis region is no longer experiencing natural population growth. In fact, we have decline. The second is that the St. Louis metropolitan region has a history of outmigration, negative net outmigration. If the St. Louis metropolitan region is going to grow, it needs people moving into the region at a faster rate than people leaving the region. Third is that we now have new evidence that suggests that the Black population in the St. Louis metropolitan region is actually declining. And it's declining at a fairly large rate. And so the St. Louis metropolitan region cannot grow if it's losing its second largest demographic group. Then lastly, second, better? Okay. Lastly, the St. Louis metropolitan region needs to become more diverse and it needs a larger immigrant population. The St. Louis metropolitan region is an anomaly when you compare it to the top 25 metropolitan regions. And I'll share some information on that. So every time I begin a talk on demography, I start with this quote. The fundamental principle of demography is that demographic transitions, births, deaths, and migration are an inevitable aspect of change, persisting irrespective of whether individuals recognize, acknowledge, or accept the underlying demographic realities and trends. My goal here today is simply to present the data. At the end of the day, you have to draw your own conclusions about what this data means, what the short-term impacts are, and the long-term impacts are. Many of the charts that I will be sharing today are going to seem unbelievable, but they're grounded in facts. You may find them disturbing, you may find them offensive, but it's the data that we're working with today. So the primary point of this discussion is on the St. Louis metropolitan region, which is the 15 counties on the Missouri side and the Illinois side. We spend a tremendous amount of time studying the Missouri side, but part of the challenge that we're starting to realize is that the Illinois side has a lot of demographic challenges. And we'll see today it's many of those counties that are actually responsible for some of the numbers we're seeing at the metropolitan regional level. So if we think about this as simply a St. Louis City issue, it's not. It's a regional issue and we need regional policy solutions. So I want to start first with some very positive stories because at the end, you may find this presentation to be very negative when we look at the charts. There are lots of good things happening in St. Louis City, St. Charles County, St. Louis County, around the region. People are working hard and they're trying to remake the region, and we see a lot of success stories out there. And so we have to define, when we look at these metrics, what is success? And so one of the challenges we're going to have as a region, that if we define population growth as one measure of success, we need to understand what those challenges are. So I want to start with the micro trend. A lot of what I'm talking about is already happening in other parts of the country. Japan really is the case study of understanding what happens to a country, what happens to a city, what happens to a town when more people die than are being born. We have pretty good models because birth rates and death rates are pretty consistent. And so we have a pretty good sense of what the future looks like simply based on births and deaths. They don't change radically. And so Japan's been expecting this for at least 40 years. They've been understanding that if nothing changes, that they're going to be in what's called a demographic winter. More people are dying than are born, and you have an aging population. So the demographic winter is this area of the curve here. This is your demographic spring, where you have more births than deaths. But once you get here, you have more people dying than are born. You will eventually, this is natural population loss. You will eventually get population loss if you have no migration coming into the region. And that's the policy issue facing Japan today. They're a very restrictive country in terms of immigration. And so they have to have this discussion of how are they going to grow or not grow if they're restricted. But this is here in the United States. These trends are here in the United States. They've been here for at least 2 decades. What COVID did, COVID accelerated trends that were supposed to happen in 2030, 2040, and they are here today. Unfortunately, they are here today. We have 25 states now that have more people dying than are being born. This is not new. We had about 10 states that had more people dying than are born around 2010. But you see here that Missouri is in this pack of states now that has more people dying than not being born. Missouri should not be there. This was supposed to happen in 2033, 2034. So we're there today. The new data that should be released any day now will show, the 22 data will show that Missouri is still in a demographic winter. The 23 data looks like we may have more births than deaths, but the cumulative number of deaths will outnumber births, at least for the foreseeable future. And that's really going to be the challenge, is will Missouri be able to get off this list in this decade? And that's going to be the goal. But this is West Virginia. And so if we go back to West Virginia, we go back, this is month birth and death data. We go back to 2003 here. We can see that over time, each month, we can see that it was close, and then around 2008, deaths start to outnumber births, and now West Virginia is in a permanent demographic winter. More births, more deaths than births in the state of West Virginia. And nobody's been able to turn these around. Japan's tried to turn these around. Poland's trying to turn these around. Russia's trying to turn these curves around. We have not been very successful in turning these curves around. So once that gap becomes so big, it's very difficult to turn these around. So this is West Virginia. Here's Missouri. We're in our demographic, we're beginning. We still hope to get out of it. But we're about 15, 20 years behind West Virginia. It's coming. We have a very large baby boom population. When it comes, it'll be 2031, 2032, if we're not able to get out of it this decade, or else we're going to be in a permanent demographic winter, like West Virginia. The United States, the white non-Hispanic population, has been in a demographic winter for a very long time. And so you can see here, there are more whites, non-Hispanics that are dying than are being born now. And it's very unlikely that that gap will change. In Missouri, that gap is present as well. More whites are dying than are being born in Missouri. And the gap is now fairly significant in Missouri. Again, Missouri is home to a very large baby boom population. And so with declining fertility rates and increasing death rates, that gap is going to increase. So this is the trend that we see here for the St. Louis metropolitan region. The St. Louis metropolitan region, for many decades, had more people born than were dying. It had what we call natural growth. It had pretty significant natural growth in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000. But it started to slow down because of our aging population. And so we could see here at 2011, 2012, that natural growth was getting smaller and smaller. And a reminder, we have no in-migration coming into the region. We have negative migration, more people leaving the region. So COVID happens, and we see that COVID caused deaths to outnumber births in the region. We see the increase there, and then a small decline here. But here's the concern for the region. We see here our births decline, a little bit of COVID bump, but then a decline to 27,695 births. Those births are now equivalent to the historic death numbers of 2019. That's the challenge. Because it's unrealistic to assume that our death numbers are going to go below the 2019 death numbers, historic death. We may get 1 or 2 more drops, but very small drops to maybe 28,000. But if our birth rate, if our birth numbers fall to 25,000 for the region, the St. Louis region is going to have a difficult problem growing again of births over deaths, simply because we know that this number will eventually start to go up again in the latter part of this decade. That's the challenge for the region. So we already see it here. If we look at cumulative births and deaths, there's 126,000 deaths and 170,000 births just this decade. The gap is small, and each year the gap gets bigger. This will happen. This is not a theoretical question. This is going to happen based on the age structure of our population. So the question is, what can we do to reduce that gap? How can we get more families and children to the region, or families to stay, or people to stay here, have families and have children in our region? That's the challenge for the region. If we do nothing, this gap will continue to grow. So the St. Louis metropolitan region is not alone. Pittsburgh was the first metropolitan region to go into a demographic winter. It's been there for over a decade, and it's not going to come out. It's like West Virginia, it's going to be in a permanent demographic winter. Tampa Bay's in a permanent demographic winter, but Tampa's different. People are moving to Tampa, right? Cleveland and St. Louis joined Pittsburgh in 2020 in the demographic winter. And then we have some other metropolitan regions, Providence, Bergamo, Louisville, and Detroit, that are also in a demographic winter, but they're kind of unique because Birmingham, Louisville, and Detroit over this past year actually have more births than deaths now. So they're trying to get out of their demographic winter now. St. Louis needs to join Detroit. It needs to have more births than deaths. If it joins Pittsburgh, and we modeled what that is like, this could really be big, bad news for the St. Louis metropolitan region if we have a demographic loss like Pittsburgh, simply from births and deaths. So this is a quote from West Virginia that was published in the newspaper last fall. With an ever-increasing percent of its population consisting of persons 65 of age and over, the state can expect increasing number of deaths over birth each year, large expenditures for healthcare, and decline in its workforce. On one of the measures that we use, we study the ends of the population distribution, the very young and the elderly. Using that ratio, the St. Louis metropolitan region is the 11th oldest region in the country. If we compare it to Kansas City, it's 31st of the top 50 metropolitan regions, right? That's our demographic challenge. If we use an aging index, which looks at a larger cohort of young people, and if we do it by county, we see that there are several counties in which the senior population is outnumbering the youth. Calhoun, Jersey, Bond, St. Louis County, Monroe, Madison, Clinton, all have a larger number of senior citizens compared to children under 10 years old. Demographically speaking, you actually want more children in your population than elderly individuals. That's what contributes to your demographic growth is a younger cohort of individuals. So the challenge for the region is St. Louis County is in that mix. And St. Louis County is not a small county. It's a county of 1 million residents and declining as we speak. So the second trend that I want to talk about that's at a macro level is the composition of the United States has fundamentally changed since the 1970s. I'm just going to show you from the last decade. What we see here is that 50% of the population growth over the last 10 years, from the 2010 to 2020 census, 50% of it came from the Hispanic population. 50% came from non-Hispanics, which means that if you don't have a Hispanic population in your region, you're not going to benefit from the births and the population growth from the Hispanic population. You're going to miss out on that 50% that's there. And that's part of the story of St. Louis. It's not getting the demographic dividends of the births that are happening within the Hispanic population. So this is at the national level. If we come to the St. Louis metropolitan region over the past 10 years with the census, we see that the region grew by 32,000 residents. Hispanics grew by 34,000 residents. So it made up for all of the net loss of the non-Hispanics here. But we see that the white population, there was a decline of 105,000 residents. We can partly explain that with some of them marking two or more races. But we start to see a decline in the African-American population that's there. And that decline has continued ever since the 2020 census. So this number, this Hispanic population of 106,000, is a fairly small number for the St. Louis metropolitan region of 2.8 million residents. This number, if we simply were able to get the growth based on our population size, should be about 325,000, 350,000 Latinos in our region. So we're missing about 250,000 Latinos in our population. Why does that matter? If we had 250,000 Latinos, we would be a top 20 metropolitan region and growing. We would not be declining. That's simply one of the biggest pieces of the demographic group that we're missing. In terms of diversity, if we look at the top 50 metropolitan regions, we're at the bottom in terms of our racial diversity of the population. Louisville, Buffalo, Grand Rapids, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh have a population that's less diverse than St. Louis. And you can see that Pittsburgh's challenge is that it's even less diverse than its peers, right? It's only 17% of the population in Pittsburgh is a racial minority. And that contributes to why Pittsburgh is struggling today in terms of population growth. So St. Louis needs to become much more diverse in terms of its population growth. I just put this up here because there are cities, regions that are growing very fast. Over the past 3 years, Dallas is the fastest growing metropolitan region in the country. Per day, 297 people move to Dallas every day. Imagine that. 297 people move to Dallas every day. In Houston, it's 209. That's massive growth. That's extraordinary. These are people moving to these cities. And so when we issued our report in 2018, we had projected that Orlando and Charlotte were going to surpass the St. Louis metropolitan region. Why? Orlando has 114 people moving there every day, and Charlotte has 108 people moving there every day. This was going to happen. It's not a bad thing about the St. Louis. These are just regions that are growing very, very fast today. I'm going to talk about San Antonio today. San Antonio is already larger than the St. Louis metropolitan region. It has more babies born than the St. Louis metropolitan region has babies being born. So it's going to make, in addition to babies being born, that's outnumbering the St. Louis region, it has 106 people moving there every single day. It'll be larger than St. Louis in a couple years. The other city on here is Austin. 131 people move to Austin every day. It'll take a few years for Austin to be larger than St. Louis. But these are extraordinary numbers. So we have to be realistic about what we can do as a region. We will not be able to put up numbers like Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio. But there are opportunities to grow in other ways. So I want you to think about these numbers for a minute, because it's hard. When I first moved to St. Louis in 2008, and you started to study the history of the region, and you realized that the St. Louis metropolitan region was one of the largest metropolitan regions in 1970, and you looked at the 2010 census numbers, you're like, what happened? What happened to the growth? Simply from babies being born to people dying, what happened to all that growth? So the St. Louis metropolitan region in 1970, about 1.25% of the US population lived in the metropolitan region. Had we just grown, had our fair share of growth for what the United States experienced, we should have grown by 1.8 million residents. That should have been our fair share of growth. So our region today should be 4.2 million, exactly where Detroit's at, about where Detroit's at. Why aren't we at 4.2 million? Well, what happens if we would have just grown half of our fair share? We should have added 250,000 residents to our region. We should be 3.3 million, at a minimum. We're not even getting our fair share of growth here. We should be 3.3 million residents. Something happened where we did not get our fair share of growth based on the number of births that occurred in our region. And part of that explanation is we had tremendous amount of births in our region, but we also had a tremendous amount of out-migration that occurred at the same time. So I put this chart together that shows the 1970 population numbers and the 2010, 2020, the change, and then you can see the percent change from 1970 to 1980. And so these come from the standard metropolitan statistical areas. And so it shows here that the St. Louis metropolitan region gained 457,000 residents. But that's not really true because we're comparing apples and oranges here. Because the 1970 metropolitan region was about 7 counties, and today we're 15 counties, okay? So we didn't really gain 457,000 residents. The region in 1970 was 2.5 million residents already because we added these other surrounding counties to our region. So our true growth from 1970 to 2020 was 299,000 residents. I can tell you right now, there were more births than deaths than 299. The natural growth was greater than 299,000 residents. And so what's happening today, this is the growth here. So what will happen, based on the growth pattern we have, San Antonio is 93,000 residents behind St. Louis. They'll be able to make that up in 2 to 3 years. Austin is 323,000 residents behind St. Louis. They'll probably be able to make that up in 5 to 7 years. But then the question becomes Las Vegas, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Nashville. They're all growing. They're growing at very small rates. And there's 2 other cities that I have not included there, Sacramento and Portland. If those cities start to grow again, they have the potential to surpass the St. Louis metropolitan region. They have flatlined in terms of the population numbers. And now our population is declining. We are no longer experiencing growth. We have to understand why it's declining. So you won't be able to see this chart, but I just wanted to show you that the challenge that the region has here is these are all the cities, metropolitan regions in the United States of the top 50 that have negative migration, which means more people leaving and moving in. So we're not alone in this story of people leaving our region. So we're right here. Here's the St. Louis metropolitan region. So there are thousands of people on the move in the United States. People are leaving New York. They're leaving Boston, Los Angeles, San Jose. People are on the move. People are leaving Miami. And so there's still hope for St. Louis. How do we capture the imagination of all those residents who are leaving those cities and looking for another home? Where does St. Louis fit in that picture of a potential migrant coming from Boston to St. Louis or from Miami to St. Louis? The challenge is with this data, and if we go back and we reconstruct the birth and death tables, this is the St. Louis region has never experienced positive net migration with this data set, the population estimates. So the first column here is international migration. Since 2011, we have positive international migration to the region. The second column is domestic migration, though. And you see every year, domestic migration is negative, which means we have more people moving out than people moving in. And in some years, it's a pretty big number. 12,000, last year was a big number of 13,000. This year, it's 5,600 of net loss. And so our net migration is 5,636 here. So what about those international numbers? Because part of the discussion is what role does international migration play? We have one of the lowest immigrant populations in the country. And even though we have positive international migration, we're still at the bottom in the top 50 metropolitan regions in terms of growth from the international migration. Memphis, Pittsburgh, Riverside, and Birmingham are the only metropolitan regions that have a lower international migration rate among the top 50. So even though those numbers are positive, they're really low for the size of our metropolitan region. So just to give you a little factoid, in Miami since 2020 to 2023, more international migrants have moved to Miami than live in the entire metropolitan region of the St. Louis metropolitan region in that time period. So we have a very, very small immigrant population in our region relative to our size. Had we grown the way the United States grew, about minimum 10% of our population should be foreign-born, which is about 300,000. Today we're 130,000. So we're missing about 150,000 immigrants in our population totals. So people move in and out of cities every single day. We have a positive number of people moving from Kansas City to St. Louis, then from St. Louis to Kansas City. We have a positive number with Chicago. We have a positive number with New York, Omaha. But you have to look at the net gains. If we are going to turn this around, these numbers need to be in the thousands. 5,000, 6,000 people need to be coming from Chicago to St. Louis. 5,000, 6,000 people need to be coming from New York to St. Louis. If we continue to get 900, 600, it's not going to be enough to offset the people who are leaving our region. And we have people leaving our region, and they're going to those big cities. So our largest loss is to people probably who are retiring, who are not going to a US metro region. But then we have Springfield, which are maybe students, but it's Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, Miami, the big cities. People are being attracted to big cities maybe for jobs, opportunities, etc. But we're losing now in thousands there. And so even though our domestic loss is 5,000, it adds up over 10 years, over 15 years. Small numbers add up to big numbers. So I just want to say a few words about the economy. So the St. Louis metropolitan region did recover. The economy did recover. But in that recovery, it was impressive. We had a percent change that was the strongest percent change among our regional peers in the Midwest. We were at the top. But even though we had a good percent change, we fell from 22nd to 24th in GDP. So we're now the 24th largest metro economy in the United States. We were surpassed by Austin and Tampa, and then here's Portland. And so we have to look at these other economies that are there. Just one footnote, Pittsburgh has not recovered. Pittsburgh economy is smaller today than it was in 2019. Pittsburgh's in a demographic winter. They're struggling to recover. They're making progress to get back to their 2019 number, but they're not there yet. A second footnote about Pittsburgh is that the US government kind of sent them a life raft, is because the government added one county to their Metropolitan Statistical Area this year. And so we're now going to see growth in Pittsburgh, but the growth really is from adding another county to the metropolitan region. So we have to be careful about Pittsburgh as we go forward. And if we look at the growth within our MSA, as expected, I think this has been out, as expected, the St. Louis County is number one in terms of absolute growth in 2022. I don't know what happened. Okay. Sorry about that. St. Louis City is second, and St. Charles is third in terms of GDP by county in 2022. But in terms of change, you can see that the St. Louis County was 9.2%, St. Louis City is 2.7%, and St. Charles County is 9.5%. And then we see below that are the two counties on the Illinois side, St. Clair and Madison County, in terms of fairly large economies here. In Madison, you see a decline there. And so we'll have our number here, but then each county has its own performance. in terms of population statistics and economic statistics that we can look at. And it's pretty fascinating when we start to look at the county by county breakdown. So St. Louis has been losing its Black population. Right now, its population is estimated at 463,000 residents in the St. Louis metropolitan region. If we go back to 2010, it was about 510,000 residents. And so we've lost a fairly significant number of Black residents in the region. And so there's 40,000 decline there. And you can see that we have Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, Houston, we see positive population growth of the Black population. And then St. Louis is on this other end, Miami, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, with absolute changes that are larger. But if we look at percent change, there's only one region that has a larger percent change of its Black population, and that's Los Angeles. St. Louis is second in the country in percent decline of its Black population. The St. Louis metropolitan region cannot grow if it continues to lose its Black population at that rate. So these are the population estimates for the 15 county going back to 1970. And so you can see over time there's growth here. But what we're interested here is since 2020, the region is now experiencing a decline in total population growth here. And now we're below 2.8 million, with 2.797. And the numbers look like we'll continue to experience a decline each year if nothing changes. So why will this happen? Part of it is going to be this population curve for the Black population in the St. Louis metropolitan region. Over this past year, we lost about 12,000 Black residents. If we lose 12,000 Black residents every year, we're going to get to our numbers of 1990, 1980, if nothing is done to address why Black residents are leaving the St. Louis metropolitan region. We can see it in households here. So this is our total households. We've seen a decline of 16,000 Black households in the region. And we've seen a decline of about 5,000 white households. Family households, we can see decline in both. But non-family, we see it's 13,000 for the Black households. And for whites, it's a 10,000 increase. So what's happening? Lots of white residents are moving to the St. Louis metropolitan region, but we call them solo, single. They have no children, they live alone. It's the largest demographic group trend that's happening across the United States. And we see it here in St. Louis City, that solos are moving into the city at very large rates. And I'll show you a chart where the white population is actually larger than the Black population in the city of St. Louis today, partly due to the non-family white households. So this is, I just did this out of a sense of curiosity to see St. Louis County's population trend, because it's the largest county in Missouri. And the St. Louis County should, if you go back to the 1970, 1980 numbers, St. Louis County should be at 1.2 million residents, just based on natural population growth. So it's under 1 million residents and it's declining. And we can see the growth here. So we'll get these new numbers on July 1, but you can see the decline in the white population in St. Louis County, increase in the Black population, some increase in the Asian, Hispanic, American Indian, and other. And so the challenge here is we have a declining white population. It's an older population. It's a population that's moving from the county, from St. Louis County to St. Charles County. But this number, this 32,000 number, is too low for the county. So I'll give you the county, as 1 million residents, should have about 90,000 Latinos, just the county by itself. So the county's missing about 60,000 Latinos. And that, if you had 60,000 Latinos in St. Louis County, there would be no demographic winter in the region. And St. Louis County would be growing each and every year. So the region's missing this demographic group here in terms of the sheer numbers based on its 2.8 million population size. So I want to talk a little bit about St. Louis City. So we've been studying the history of the city, and it really has a very fascinating history in terms of it being a majority immigrant city and all the businesses that were created during the 1850s and so forth. So the city grew, but it peaked in 1950, and that growth was entirely due to the white population living in the city. And you can see the decline of the city corresponds to the decline of the white population leaving the city. Now we do see that there were black residents in the city, and they start to increase, and the black residents peak at 1970. So beginning from 1970, we have two of the largest demographic groups leaving the city of St. Louis. But what changed over that time is that the composition of the city changed. And so for a period of time, the black population was the demographic majority in the city. And we see that that's changing over the past 10 years in the St. Louis city. So since 2011, this is the population decline of the city. And so the city's at 281,000, and we have a pretty good idea why it's declining. I'll show that in a little bit. And so this is the challenge for the city here. But what's happened over this 11-year period is that although you see a decline, the decline in the black population, the white population has been fairly stable. And so now the two populations are statistically different from each other. And so the white population is statistically larger than the black population. And this trend shows that the black population is continuing to leave the city of St. Louis to the point that the white population will be the demographic majority in the city of St. Louis. So we kind of see this with household composition that's already happened. White households are at 50% of the households in St. Louis City are white majority households. So we already see it in white households there. But we can see it here in this chart. Black households are declining and white households are in fact increasing in the city. And so whites are moving into the city now. White households are seeing an increase in the city, and we're seeing a pretty significant decline in black households in the city that's corresponding to black families. So where we really do pick this up is in 2019 data. When we look at families with children, we see that since 2019, there's been a decline of 5,042 black families with children in the city of St. Louis. That's over 100 families per month, a decline in the city of St. Louis. Correspondingly, we only see a decline of 441 white families. So most of the loss that we're seeing at the city level is coming from black families with children who no longer see the American dream in the city, but are finding it in St. Louis County, St. Charles County. So I want to go to county by county breakdown of what's happening, because it's a complicated story. So the way I have this chart organized is population change. And so St. Louis City, over this past year, experienced the largest negative population change by St. Louis County, St. Clair. Then we see a lot of Illinois counties here. And at the bottom are the counties that are experiencing positive population increase. So St. Charles is here, Jefferson, Lincoln. And so we look at natural change. So there's our decline, more people dying than are born. So St. Louis City is still unique. It's still a very young city. So it has more babies born than people dying. But you see St. Louis County here, St. Clair, and Madison. And so those are pretty big numbers for the size of those counties. And so when we do all the math here, we see that the reason why the region's in a demographic winter is because of the Illinois counties. If we just included the Missouri counties, we would have more babies born and people dying on the Missouri side. And so the reason why this could be trouble for the region is that as we move away from COVID, we cannot say that this is COVID. This is part of the demographic structure of those counties. And that unless people move in, you're going to experience large gaps, deficiencies between births and deaths on the Illinois side that will outweigh what's happening on the Missouri side. And we cannot say that this is not going to happen in St. Charles or in St. Louis City, this birth death decline here. Second, we have migration changes here. And so we can see that St. Louis City has 5,403 lost in domestic migration, and St. Louis County is 5,574. Just St. Louis City and St. Louis County, that's 11,000 decline in residents. Those are big numbers. These counties are fairly small. When you put those type of numbers up, it's going to be difficult for these counties to make up that deficit from the city and the county. Let's go into a little bit more depth on this. So this is the 3-year change of these numbers here. So in the 3-year period, the region declined by 23,000 residents in this 3-year period. There's our natural change, and that's our net migration. So our decline's coming from 2 components. We're no longer experiencing natural population growth. And I don't think we've ever experienced net positive migration based on the data that's available. Here, St. Louis City still has more babies born, but the city is losing lots of people, primarily Black families with children. Here's St. Louis County, and then I want to talk a little bit about St. Charles County a little bit. So this is the birth and death curves for the white population in St. Louis County. The white population has been in a demographic winter for before COVID. And so if we pick them up, this is, I think, that is 2018 here. We can see over time that gap between deaths and birth is growing which is the largest demographic group in St. Louis County. That's why I present this chart, because it's a very large demographic group in St. Louis County. You can see that gap is getting bigger each month, every year. And so we cannot expect that gap to get smaller among the white population, which is the largest demographic group in St. Louis County. Jefferson County, for a while, it had more babies born and people dying. COVID came, and so there's COVID, that's outnumbered births. And now, in Jefferson County, more people are dying than are being born. It's small, but it will be growing. This is the white non-Hispanic population. St. Charles, that over 107 growth in natural population is going away. There's your births, deaths. So St. Charles has historically had a lot of babies born compared to people dying. But look over time, this is 2004. There was COVID. And then the 2022 numbers are not out yet. But what this doesn't tell you is that if we look at it for the white population in St. Charles County, more people are dying than are being born in St. Charles County. It's small, but like St. Louis County, it always starts out small and it grows each and every year, which means that 100% of the natural growth in St. Charles County is coming from minorities, come from babies born to Black women, Latinas, and Asians. 100% of the natural growth now. St. Charles County can still turn this curve around. They still have the opportunity to build housing for young families with children. That's their policy challenge. If they do nothing, this is in the structure of their age structure of their population. it'll become, St. Charles County will become St. Louis County in about 12 to 15 years. Let's focus on the city. So now we have data that shows that there are more Black residents dying and Black babies being born. We'll get our new data here, but the Black population is in this demographic winter, but it's very different than St. Louis County because of the age structure of the deaths of the population here. And so there's more Black residents dying than are born. The gap is small, but it'll continue to grow. However, it's not a true demographic winter like we see in St. Louis County. And that is the Black population has higher death rates along the age cohort groups. And so they're roughly equal populations. And so you can see that we simply have more youth that are dying that are classified as Black in St. Louis City compared to the white population. And so if we start to reduce these deaths here, you'll start to see that gap down. But this is a two-year numbers. We'll get the 3-year numbers hopefully soon. So we can't really say it's truly a demographic winter because we have a lot of youth who are dying in St. Louis City compared to the white population. And so we see here that the St. Louis white population has more babies born than are dying. And so these are the curves that you want to see, more births than deaths. So the Black and white population are experiencing the city in very different ways. The Black population is leaving, families with children are leaving, more people are dying and are being born that are Black, and the white population is increasing. It's got natural population growth, and it's got a little bit of momentum from migration coming into the city. So this is the age, simply age comparison between the white and Black population today. And so you can see that the white population here in the middle range simply outnumbers the Black population. So if we just simply look at the 30 to 44, there are roughly 22,000 whites in that category compared to 15,000 Blacks. But you see that the Black children outnumber the white children in the city. And so this is really the policy issue for the city is if Black families, there's going to be this cohort and those cohorts continue to leave, it's going to be those cohorts that are going to leave. We have fairly good evidence that these cohorts are fairly stable in the city. And so that's really going to be the policy question for the city over the next decade. St. Louis City used to be leading the state in terms of the rate of natural increase, births over deaths. It was roughly at about 10 per thousand, which was anybody would talk that's great population growth. But you can see over time the population growth has declined and it may get to 0 over the next decade. And then here we see the birth numbers, the raw birth numbers there. And so for me, the question will be, when will these changes take place? The changes will take place once there are more white babies born than Black babies born in the city of St. Louis. And I'll show you a chart of why that will be the indication of a complete transformation of the city in terms of the demographic group, a majority of the city. So these are the birth rates, Black birth rates, white birth rates, and then these are our fertility rates. But this is really the chart that brings this all home for me. The red line here are the Black female population, 15 to 44. So you can see that over this past decade, there was a decline's very sharp, and now it's a fairly steep decline among the female population that can have children. For the white female population, it was actually increasing, stable, stable, stable. Those two populations have different demographic transitions in the city of St. Louis. So once this group gets to a smaller number and the babies are below the white babies, then we'll ultimately see that the white population will be larger than the Black population, simply from these trends here. We'll talk a little bit about East St. Louis. We don't talk too much about the East the counties that make up the Metro East. So I just randomly picked out some counties from different parts of the region: Arnold, South, Chesterfield, Florissant, St. Charles, and to look at the population change. So like St. Louis City, East St. Louis has lost population. It's lost about 9,000 residents, or 32% decline in its population. And then we can see that very little increase in Arnold, some increase in Chesterfield, a negative decline in Florissant, and St. Charles has experienced some increase there. In terms of households, again, we see that the household change here is 3,000 decline in households between that time period. Chesterfield's seen an increase of 1,500 households, and St. Charles about 3,400 households. And in terms of families, we can see about 3,000 families. There's been a decline in 3,000 families in East St. Louis. And so the trends I'm talking about at the metro level, we can do at the municipality level. I simply don't have enough time to go through all the municipalities that are there. But that data is available now. So I want to end my presentation, I don't know what I'm doing on time, with what the future looks like. So if you're paying attention, if you're really paying attention, you'll notice that we are closing schools. And we've been closing schools for a while. And I've been telling people what we need to do, we need to have a metric of every time a school closes, we mark it. This is what they do in Japan. Every time a school closes, it is marked that this school will never reopen, as a reminder of the demographic winter that's here in our region. So this was a story of Fonbon, no, this is a story of Kirkwood schools, and this is St. Monica and Creve Coeur. St. Monica just recently announced plans to close, I think it was last week, and Kirkwood, the projections of Kirkwood have not happened in terms of the number of children that should be attending their public schools. And the question is why? Because if you go to these communities, they're no longer affordable to young families. Webster Groves is not affordable for a young family that's trying to have kids. Kirkwood is not affordable. Creve Coeur Chesterfield is not becoming affordable. And so and a lot of these communities are voting down housing initiatives for these young families. And so part of the challenge is we have to have this discussion that if you vote down these housing initiatives for these families will move, because part of the American dream is owning a house. So one way to think about the future is to think about how are we replacing ourselves. So right now, the estimate from the American Community Survey shows that we'll have about 147,000 graduates from our public and private high schools. So these are the people going out into the workforce. They're joining the Army, they're becoming teachers, they're becoming police officers, nurses. They're working at Schnucks, Deerbergs, Home Depot, Lowe's, Culver's. That's your workforce that's coming out right now, between 2022 and 2025. We're going to replace that similar cohort with the 122 births. That's what's happened. That 122, if you just saw that chart in St. Louis City, some of those children are going to die. Some of those children will get involved in the criminal justice system. And some of those children are going to move with their families to another metropolitan region. So a very high estimate is that we'll have 117,000 high school graduates beginning in 2041. We're going to go from 146 to 117,000. That's the demographic challenge, is what's the impact on our economy when this number is going to go down every year and we don't bring young families into the region that have children. There'll be a lot of schools that will not make it. A lot of high schools will not make it. There'll be some more. Fonbon was the first one to close. It's not the last one that's going to close. This is a larger problem that's going to impact Missouri. If you're paying attention nationally, many colleges and universities are starting to close because of low enrollments. This demographic storm is here. It's not going to go away. So in the short term, we are going to fall to 24. The St. Louis metropolitan region, we need to get younger. We need more families with children. We need to build housing for them. We need to support them with childcare. We need to reduce educational costs. We need to reach out to people who are leaving these other metropolitan regions and help them imagine the American dream in St. Louis. People are on the move. People are leaving. They're leaving San Jose, they're leaving Los Angeles, Miami, Boston, New York, Detroit, Chicago. How do we reach out to these residents who are leaving and say, come to St. Louis to make St. Louis your home? And part of that story is going to be immigration. It's not, we cannot solve our problems with immigration. It's one solution, but it has to be part of our solution. If nothing changes, St. Louis City will become a white majority city. Right now, if St. Louis City loses another 10,000 residents, the white population simply needs to be 135,000 residents for it to be a white majority city. It's at 130,000 today. So each time the city loses residents, the probability of the white population becoming the demographic majority increases. We have major demographic hurdles. We have more deaths surpassing births. Unless we act now and bring young families to the region, you've seen those charts. I have similar charts for the Illinois side. They've been in demographic winter for a while. It's just beginning. The baby boom population, I heard a number, every day 10,000 baby boomers are retiring. They're turning 78. Life expectancy is about 78. The next decade we're going to see excessive mortality from the baby boom population. And the St. Louis metropolitan region is home to one of the largest baby boom populations in the country. It's coming. We've known this is coming, and we've been talking about increasing fertility rates for a while. Fertility rates are on the decline. We cannot be a major metropolitan region that says we're a destination if we're losing our black population. This simply we cannot make statements like that. We have to keep our black population in our region. And we have to figure out the outmigration. We have to keep our residents here. I showed you the chart of the other regions in the demographic winter. They're having these discussions. Pittsburgh's been having this discussion for a while. People are going to other cities to start to recruit their residents to leave those cities because Cleveland sees this. If Cleveland doesn't act, they're in the same situation as St. Louis. They're trying to recruit people to their region. Detroit is very aggressive in trying to get people to their region. More and more regions are going to, because we know that the natural population growth is getting smaller and smaller, so the growth is going to come from migration. How do you convince people to leave a region and move to another region? So if nothing changes, I think we need to go back to the question I started with at the beginning. Success does not have to be defined as population growth. So this is a quote from the Pittsburgh MSA region. Although regional economic development strategies usually seek to expand the clientele and workforces of local businesses by attracting more people to a given geographical area, planning for a future that reflects the population trends, which are relatively flat population growth into the future, you can build a prosperous, high-quality life region, but it doesn't actually need to come from population growth. And that's why I started my discussion with successes. There are lots of good things happening in our region, and they'll continue to happen. But if we continue to define success as population growth, we need to be realistic and accept the realities that face us. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Hi, thanks. I can remember, what is going to happen when the baby boomer population starts kind of meeting that arch that you're talking about with births. But I'm curious, at this point, what does that kind of period of time look like? Is that a 15-year, 20-year period of time where deaths are rising, or is that going to level out at that peak?
So we will have this excessive death range for baby boomers, but then my generation's coming, the Gen X generation coming. The challenge is that fertility rates are continuing to go down. And so if fertility rates continue to go down, we'll still continue to see that excessive deaths. I didn't talk too much about this, but the gift that we have today is from the 2008 recession. If we go back and look at our fertility data before 2008, fertility there was actually increasing every year. Each month, babies were increasing. When the 2008 recession happened, it was an economic shock, but it was a demographic shock as well. And it's because people thought that the economy was collapsing. And so as rational actors, the first thing you do is you make sure that your house is stable. And we focused so much of our attention on the economy, we forgot about the demographic side of this equation. And so the economy recovered, but the fertility rates never recovered. And they've been declining every year since 2008.
I was glad you really clearly emphasized the litany of housing, childcare, education. Are you aware of any regions in the country that have found a creative, innovative way to make that possible for families to afford childcare, housing, and education?
So there are some programs that are out there. I recently read an article in Austin that community college is going to be free now. That's a commitment that they made to their residents there. And so again, Austin's one of those cities, because I think they've recognized that they need to keep their workforce. Austin's kind of, I have a little question mark by Austin because it's growing so fast it doesn't have enough housing. And so the question, can it, like a lot of these cities that they've stopped at 2.5 million because they've hit this mark. They're growing too fast, but the infrastructure is not there. And so this may be the story of Austin, but Austin's one, where they're making community college education free. I think in general, you have to have the discussion about maternity policy in the United States. We are an outlier in that when it comes to employee-based policy for women having children. We need better health care. I've seen some of these costs for health care. It's just extraordinarily the amount of money that parents are paying for health care. We have to do something on, health care, child care. We've got to do something to make child care affordable. There's some other proposals that typically get voted down because we are a diverse society and not everybody wants to have children. And so the US Census has projected sometime in the 2030s, solos are going to outnumber family households. And so this is coming, right? So family households with children will be outnumbered by solos. I mean, if you're paying attention to your neighborhoods, there's not one municipality in St. Louis where the majority of households have children in it. I live in Chesterfield. I was kind of shocked when I paid attention to my neighborhood. There's 60 houses in my neighborhood. About 10 of them have children. Everybody else is an empty nester. This is the story in St. Charles, University City. The majority of the households out there do not have children under 18 in them. And so we have to just kind of recognize that this is a larger demographic trend that's happening across the United States.
Have you shared most of this information, or have you had the opportunity to talk with the policymakers in Jefferson City? Because a lot of the policies that they are implementing are really curtailing on the things that are needed. We're talking about affordable housing, policies in favor of immigration, policies in promoting or subsidizing education. And so, I mean, all of these things that you're talking to us definitely are based on policy making. And one of the reasons that I have heard that a lot of people don't want to have children is because it costs too much health-wise, and it costs too much to have childcare.
So it is true that the cost to have a child is increasing every year. And so that burden, even if you have health insurance, that burden's getting higher and higher for potential parents. I have talked with policy. A lot of these policies are local though. And so that one of the challenges for the St. Louis metropolitan region is that it has many different municipalities that do not act in concert with each other. And so if anything you got from this is that this is a regional issue. Chesterfield will say we don't have the problem. St. Charles may say we don't have a problem. The problems that those challenges will be coming, right? These issues are happening across the United States. So when I see, St. Charles voted down a 500 housing unit, that's a local decision. There's not much that the state can do. Those were local politicians who said we don't want any more housing in St. Charles County. I think it was a mistake to vote down a 500 housing unit, but that was a decision that they made. We see these debates happening in Chesterfield today with the redevelopment of the Chesterfield Mall. I would argue that you should have at least 5,000 housing units there. It's the last opportunity one of the last opportunities for the region to build something great. Literally, like every month, the Preserve Chesterfield people keep getting that number of reductions in the plan. And so now I think it's down to 2,500 households. But initially the plan was 5,000 households there. And so I think they should go back to 5,000. Like build 5,000 houses there. The Creveport development, I think the mayor, when he did the interview, he made a good point that it's not about us, but it's about the next generation. What are we going to leave to the next generation? And so he's been very vigorous in arguing for residential development with that development project there. But again, residents are fighting it, right? They don't want new development in the area. Town and Country voted down a development for Maryville. And so part of the things that we have to recognize is that many people are okay with no growth. There are many people in our region that are okay with no growth. I would argue that there are consequences if you understand those birth and death curves. If there's no attempt to try to grow, the implication's we won't see it today, we won't see it this decade. It's the generation that's coming in 2040, 2050. Those small businesses are going to see it. They're going to try to find workers, and there's going to be 30,000 less high school workers coming out, period. St. Louis City will have trouble hiring people to clean streets. Hiring police officers is going to be difficult in 2040. So we're not going to see it in this generation, in this decade, but it's coming. It's coming in 2040, 2050, if we do nothing.
Thanks. I found a lot of your numbers to get kind of dizzy after a little while. There's so many, and I'm a little puzzled. Maybe the answer is in this policy question. When we say that there's growth in places like Houston or Dallas, and we think about the anti-immigrant sentiment in this country and where the source of it tends to be, there's state legislation in Texas that doesn't seem very favorable to immigrants, and yet we see growth there. So how do we resolve that tension, I guess? Is it simply because there's jobs there?
So there are jobs there. People are finding the American dream in Texas. Dallas and Houston are on two different demographic paths, though. Houston is receiving a lot of international migration. Dallas's growth is coming from domestic migration. So they're a little bit different in terms of people are going to those cities. I argue, so I don't think the story's over. And I gave a talk last week on climate change. And so the only reason people are moving to Phoenix is because there's air conditioners. But the state stepped in, and the state put a stop to the number of housing developments that can happen around Phoenix because there's concern with water in the state and not enough water to support the state. So at some point, that growth that's intended for Phoenix is going to go somewhere else. Texas is already struggling with its electric grid. I don't think the projections for Texas is 50 million residents. I don't think Texas can get to 50 million. I don't think just like California reached a point, I think in Texas it will reach a point, which means that there'll be hundreds of thousands of people leaving Texas in the same way there are hundreds of thousands of people leaving California. The people leaving California went to Las Vegas, Phoenix, Utah, Denver. The people who are going to leave Phoenix are going to come out of Texas are going to come out of a different pathway. Oklahoma City is going to probably be the biggest winner of the migration, because it's right there. It's right outside of Dallas. I think if we pay attention to what's going on in Oklahoma City, they're embracing this growth of Latinos. They kind of see that this is an opportunity for them. Nashville, Memphis, Charlotte, Indianapolis, these are all places that can benefit from this growth. So the question is, how much of that growth will come to St. Louis? That will come out of Texas, and that's the unknown. Now, if we're not very welcoming and say we don't want the growth from Texas, they will go to other states will embrace them. Michigan will embrace them. Trust me, Michigan's going to embrace anybody moving to Detroit. Cleveland is embracing residents. Pittsburgh just launched a global, I think it's called Global Pittsburgh, because they've recognized that they need to become much more diverse. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question directly, but people find the American dream in Texas, but they will be moving. But part of Texas's growth is in its demographics. I don't have the chart here, but I have it on my LinkedIn page. Latinos are the largest demographic group in Texas today. The Latinos outnumber the white population in Texas. But if you do it by age cohort, Latinos are the largest demographic group from babies. I think it goes to 42. And then starting at 43, whites outnumber Latinos. So in 25 years, the Latinos will be the largest demographic group in every age group in Texas. And so that growth is coming. This 12 million baby natural growth in Texas is coming. Now, how much of it's going to stay in Texas and how much of it's coming out of Texas, that's the question. Who's going to benefit? Which cities are going to benefit from that growth? As I gave this talk, an hour, in Texas alone, there were 8 Latino babies born to 1 white baby every hour. In California, it's about 11 to 1. So babies are being born in the United States. More babies are born in Houston than the entire state of Missouri today. But more babies are born in Dallas than in Houston. So babies are being born. The natural growth is there. The question is, where does it go, and what are communities doing to welcome those new Americans to their communities?
So can you give us other examples of other things that could be done aside from demographics to make things happen for us better?
So I think the number one is job growth. People move because of jobs. And so if you go and read the business reports of these, if you go and read the business reports and read what other regions say about St. Louis, they consider St. Louis a threat because we're an affordable place to live. So if you read what Atlanta's constantly doing a strategic analysis of its vulnerabilities. Houston does this, and it's always like, we have to worry about St. Louis. But then the next couple paragraphs about, we don't really have to worry about them because they don't pay well. We're very low in terms of salaries. And so part of it is we need jobs, we need good paying jobs that will attract people there to our region. And so that's the challenge is how do we act as a region, a regional voice, create good paying jobs. But I tell people, like, if we were Houston or Dallas, and we were getting that amount every day, there's no housing here. There's no supply of housing for the type of growth that those cities are getting. And so that's the challenge, is that we're not even building enough housing for the population, that quality housing for the population. And that's where the city, so it's always the question, well, which county is responsible for this? St. Charles County? I mean, Lincoln County is one alternative, but the commute from Lincoln County to St. Louis County is a pretty long commute. So I don't think that that's not a realistic alternative to build all your housing in Lincoln County. One of the alternatives is St. Louis City has to be part of the solution. If the city does not continue, it's got to stop its population decline, but it's got to start building housing for families to make families want to stay in the city. Almost all of the housing that's being built today is for non-families. Sorry about that. For non-families, and it's great high-end housing. But who can afford $1 million house, or $1 million condo, or $1 million house in Lafayette Square? That's for a very elite group of home buyers. St. Louis City needs to build homes for families that are attainable. But that's the challenge in the city, is it's got to stop its population growth, and it's got to start building housing for families with children.
On behalf of the Incarnate Word Foundation and the St. Louis Community Foundation, we just wanted to thank Dr. Sándoval for sharing his important work.